Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. Got a big show lined up for you. Let's get right on into it. All right, folks, Clemson wants out too. Yep, Clemson's ready to get out of the ACC, and they're sick and tired of being stuck in this conference.
Get me out of here! Here, just eat that! Leave us alone!
Yeah, FSU and Clemson, they're ready to go. And there's 5 others on top of that. But let's get into this story. And this is on Clemson Wire by Steve Hawley. It says Clemson attorneys are gearing up for legal action, possible ACC split. This has to do with a big report that came out in Yahoo Sports by Ross Dellinger. And it talks about Clemson leaving the ACC with several other current conference members. It's been floated as a possibility. It says much of the story centers on college football playoff expansion, revenue distribution. However, it does discuss the fact that there are 7 schools in the ACC that are currently considering leaving or trying to figure out a possible exit strategy from the ACC. And those schools are Florida State, of course, who's in a lawsuit right now with the ACC, Miami, North Carolina, NC State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. They met and discussed it back in 2023 as far as a challenge to the league's grant of rights document in an effort to leave the conference. It says those schools were led by Florida State and Clemson. And what they considered was getting a lot more money. And the big schools want more money of the ACC pot, but the other schools in the ACC are like, absolutely not. We're not doing that. So it would create a haves and have-nots in the ACC, which is one of the reasons why all these schools want out of the ACC, because the SEC and the Big Ten are over there throwing money around like crazy, building facilities. They can do anything they want. And now they're getting ready to get a bunch of money at the college football playoff that Clemson and FSU and these other 5 schools are like sitting here going, what about us? Are we chopped liver? And unfortunately, if you're in the ACC, they're treating you like chopped liver. That's just a fact. That's why so many teams want out, especially the big teams. And Clemson is a big team. It talks about Clemson and FSU are the only ACC schools that reached the 4-team college football playoff from 2024 to 2023. And, of course, FSU got totally creaked last year. Totally undefeated season, won their conference championship. Boom, you're out. They lost their quarterback. And look, the ACC just doesn't get a lot of props. They don't get a lot of respect from the college football playoff. One of the good things of going to a 12-team playoff is that won't happen anymore. You go undefeated, you're going to be in. It says months after Florida State filed lawsuit against the league in open court, so Dellinger reported that Clemson has also consulted with the school's own attorneys to discuss its legal options. And here's where it says, attorneys for Clemson have spent the last several months gearing up for legal action. They're getting ready. Sources with knowledge of the discussions tell Yahoo Sports. It says more secession attempts could send the conference into chaos. The outcomes of the Florida State or Clemson exit, can they break free of the grant of rights? If they figure out a way out of that, there's going to be those other 5 schools will follow in suit. And the SEC and the Big Ten, they can't really talk to them right now because they don't want to get sued by the ACC. But I can guarantee you Greg Sankey will scoop up some of those teams, and Big Ten definitely will. And if I'm the SEC, I take Florida State, Clemson. I take as many of those teams as I can out of those 7. And I think probably North Carolina, NC State, Virginia Tech will probably be split up. Probably 2 of them will go to the Big Ten, 2 will go to the SEC. But there's no way the SEC can let Florida State or Clemson go to Big Ten. That just can't happen. And they're probably going to want Miami too. Of course, I always consider Miami sort of an international city. I don't know that it would be the end of the world if SEC didn't get them, but they would probably want them. I mean, it's a good get. Miami's a fine school. Talks about a date that is looming as a possible turning point for the league and the 7 schools. It says, while ESPN's contract with the ACC extends through 2036, the network, only the network, has the option to opt out. The ACC does not. They can opt out of the final 9 years starting in 2027. However, for them to do that, that has to be done by an earlier date, which is February of 2025, which is less than a year from now. And I can go ahead and tell you the college football playoff, the payouts that they're talking about doing are going to facilitate this and push it even harder because the haves are getting ready to get a lot more money. And I'll show you this. And I covered this yesterday, but I didn't do as good a job as I should have. I need to be using more charts because it just makes it easier to explain rather than have me up here running my jaw. And this college football money distribution, the SEC Each team will be getting $23 million from the college football playoff alone. Big Ten gets 21. It's actually the same amount of money. It's just there are more teams in the Big Ten. The ACC drops down to 13.7, Big 12, 12.3. As you can see, almost twice as much money is going to go to the SEC as the ACC, and they're already about $30 million a year behind because of their grant of rights and what they get from ESPN as opposed to what the SEC gets. So now they're going to be $40 million, $50 million behind every year.
Woo! 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 Ow! Love that money.
It gets really expensive as far as the teams separating themselves because literally Vanderbilt's getting $30, $40 million more a year than Florida State or Clemson. Now, I can go ahead and tell you that bugs them big time because what can you do with $40 million bucks a year? A heck of a lot. And we've been talking a lot about the 14-team proposal that the college football playoff is considering, and the SEC and Big Ten want to change it to 14 teams. And the reason they want to do that, they want 2 automatic buys for the Big Ten champ and the SEC champ. And it would add 2 more teams basically to the playoff because those 2 teams would have been in anyway. And the breakdown goes like this, and I put this in a chart. The SEC would get 2 automatics. Big Ten would get 2 automatics, one of which would be a bye in each one of these. The ACC would get an automatic, their champion. The Big 12 would get an automatic, their champ. The group of 5 would get 1 automatic, their conference champion that's the highest rated. Then you'd have 7 at large. The way they were talking about it before, the 3-3, 2-2 and all that, that was going to leave some good teams out because had they done that proposal this year, Missouri and Ole Miss would have been left out, which I think would have been a travesty. Those 2 teams would have definitely earned the right to be in a 12-team playoff. So that's one I think I got to think that's going to pass. I really do. That makes a lot of sense because you got 7 at large. That means any of these teams that maybe have 2 losses in the big leagues, they can still get in and they're not going to get creaked. So I would think that would pass. But now that Clemson's gearing up to get out of the ACC, Florida State, and here's the thing. Let's say Clemson sues the ACC, same as FSU. Well, the ACC's already paying for 2 teams of lawyers in North Carolina and in Florida to fight FSU because they scurried to the North Carolina courts the day before Florida State launched their lawsuit because they got wind of it and got in front of them. But they're having to pay 2 teams because each state, you have to have lawyers in each one because you can't be sending them back and forth. There are state laws against that. You have to have a license to practice in North Carolina, just like Florida. So the ACC's paying 2 teams of lawyers, probably $250, $300 an hour per lawyer. And now if Clemson does that, are they going to do the same thing? Because Clemson's in South Carolina, they file a suit there. Is the ACC going to run to North Carolina and file another suit? I guess they could use the same lawyers for that, but that's just going to be double billing. So the ACC could go bankrupt if a bunch of these teams actually might be a way to push the ACC to allow them out. Is just keep suing them. You know, if you get 5, 6, 7 teams suing the ACC at the same time, they're not going to know what to do. So there are ways of putting a significant amount of pressure on the ACC, which is, I think, what Clemson's thinking right now, because it gets easier as more and more teams start suing them. So this is going to get very interesting over the coming weeks and months. I just don't see those teams staying there long term. Like I said, FSU and ACC are like this. There's no way that team can stay there and work with the ACC. And Clemson, if they sue them, it's going to be the same way and right down the line. So I think we're going to see a lot of movement in fairly short order. And if you like this type of content, be sure to hit that like button. Let's continue to cover all these big college sports news stories. Of course, my Vols, the SEC, and I've got to cover this other stuff. I mean, the ACC, Big Ten, all that, it's just so interesting. I mean, there is literally 50 years worth of stuff happening in about 3 years. Normally, this stuff takes decades. So if you want to continue to get these type videos, just hit this little button right here. It'll help you get my videos. You won't have to hunt them down. And right over here is the most recent video YouTube thinks you'll enjoy based on your viewing history. And that has a lot to do with the algorithm. And you folks know I don't know a whole lot about the algorithm.
Who are you? I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you.
No, definitely not. But, you know, I do my best. And we'll see you next time on Sports Talk Jay.